My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students from the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. Zohran Mamdani's election as our new mayor is a seismic shift for New York City, both in his Democratic Socialist of America roots and his cementing the passing of the torch to a new generation, finally pushing aside those of us of a certain age who now have someone else to blame when things screw up. At 34 years old, Mamdani tapped into a deep frustration, especially among younger New Yorkers, with a ruthless focus on affordability in a city where, as one-time candidate Jimmy McMillan famously said, the rent is too damn high. Whether it was that focus on affordability or a rejection of former Governor Andrew Cuomo's attempt to resurrect his career, we're moving forward with our first Muslim and first South Asian mayor in a turbulent time when the former New Yorker who now sits in the White House threatening to sharpen the knives he wants to stick into the ribs of his one-time home. And while the New York Post is wallowing in its hyperbolic apoplexy about Marxism is now taking control of New York City, whether that is Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, or Groucho Marx and John Lennon, or hopefully somewhere in between, we're entering a new phase in the history of our city. We're joined by four New Yorkers with varied experience and varied views on what the election means for our future. Ruth Messenger was Manhattan's borough president and a one-time mayoral candidate who went on to lead the American Jewish World Services. Helen Chang is a political science professor at CUNY's Hostos College in the Bronx, who focuses on generational patterns in voting, which I would argue is the overwhelming driving force in Mamdani's victory. Chris Policano was the director of external affairs for CUNY's School of Labor and Urban Studies, who's had a long and distinguished career as a reporter and in the social services and union movement. And Harry Siegel is an editor at thecity.nyc, which did a bang-up job of covering the campaign, who will tell us what it all means. Ruth, let me start with you. We saw Mamdani win with 50.4% of the vote, which means 49.6% of the people did not vote for him. And as every candidate does, he claims a mandate. Does he have a mandate? Are there seeds of problems? I mean, where do we go from here? Is it fair to claim a mandate?
Of course it's fair to claim a mandate. He won. And he won over 50% with three candidates, which often doesn't happen. More strikingly, and you're going to say it's generational issues, I'm going to also say, as someone who spent a lot of her life running for office and supporting candidates, it's a turnout story.
Yes.
This election puts in a high focus the fact that in all of our elections, all of our American elections, others overseas, but let's talk about America and New York particularly, we have a vast number of registered voters who don't go to the polls. We also have eligible people who never register, but we have registered voters who've taken the trouble to register, and then they skip this election and that election. And part of what Mamdani and his volunteers did was say there are a lot of people out there who are eligible to vote and don't show up. And if we can reach them and engage them on the issues that are most on their minds, we'll get them to the polls. The time, for me at least, because he was not my candidate in the primary, and the minute I knew that there was someone new on the scene was when I looked at the number of early voters in the primary. It was like 3 times what usually shows up for early voting, which is people like me who don't like to stand online. No, it was clearly people rushing to the polls because they'd been organized. So I just want to say his mandate is, of course, first of all, he's mayor. So he got elected. You get elected, you're mayor, you have a mandate to do what you want and to try to work.
A win is a win.
A win is a win. And you have that position which allows you to do try to do all the things that are on your agenda, working with the city council, working with the state, working with the federal government, God save us. But I also want to say that in some ways he has a particular mandate because he organized, first of all, he turns out to be a phenomenal organizer, as does his top staff. And second of all, they organized people who have many issues on their minds and have not previously thought that government would help them. That's a comment on those of us who spend a lot of time in government, but now they do, and he has the capacity. I guess that's really what I want to say. Part of his mandate is he has the capacity to keep organizing people, and particularly the people who supported him, and saying,
in fact,
here's what we need you to do.
He's forming a 501c4 to keep outside pressure on the government, precisely to keep that organizing. Helen, those people who turned out, who have not turned out in the past, who may not have registered, are largely young. priced out of this city. A lot of them come from elsewhere. There's the whole element. If you look at where his votes came from, there was like across a big swath of gentrifying areas where you have younger people coming into New York City and can't afford to live here. Is this the passing of a torch?
It's so hard to predict if this, is a confluence of the right moment, the right factors. But I would agree in terms of turnout, the engagement of younger Gen Z voters and volunteers. We think perennial complaint is that young people don't vote. They're not engaged. They're so much online now, but there was a translation of that online enthusiasm to actually on-the-ground volunteering. And so I think it could be a moment, but it could be a moment that passes or the momentum can continue. I think it's a little too early to tell. But, I think there's such an enthusiasm and a re-engagement with politics. There's this classic term in political science, political efficacy. Do you believe your efforts and your vote matters? And for a long time, I think millennials might have thought no, that wasn't worth their engagement. And there is a shift in that, I believe, with this particular campaign and this election. Now, it's hard to say because as political scientists, as a researcher, we want to have these easy answers, like Gen Z does this, millennials do this generation gap and divide. And so, but I think there is a lot to be learned from, this election when it comes to generational gaps in politics.
Chris, we've been at this for a long time. Mamdani ran on a very progressive Democratic Socialist of America platform, although his platform was different than a DSA platform. We always said, don't look at the DSA, look at what I say on my website, which demonstrates a pragmatic streak. A lot of what he says he wants to do, we've had a lot of mayors come in, a lot of governors come in, they want to change the world, maybe the argument is that...
I don't think there's that long of a list of the things that he's promised to do. This illusion that he's got this long list of all these things he's going to change just doesn't exist. He focused on 2 or 3 things and said, we're going to try to do this. And what he convinced a lot of people of was that he really was going to try to do things. I don't know people who voted for him for free buses. I know people who voted for him because they felt like he was going to put their interests at the fore. And
which is the affordability argument writ large.
But the way we do things in this city. I was in Washington for 6 years under Obama. I came back, took a Long Island Railroad from my mother's house into the city, and all of a sudden, Long Island City was tall buildings, and a whole city had popped up. And that didn't happen. That happened, how did that happen? Where did that happen? Who made that happen? What was the rent on those buildings? Who made the decisions on those rents? How do these things happen? And I think people have felt like they're not part of that things are happening to them instead of with them. And he tapped into that hard and constant. So there was nothing, there's no absurdity on his list, but he's got them believing, and I think they should believe that he's on their side.
With respect to my Brooklyn College English professors, Robert Browning said a man's reach should exceed his grasp, but what's a heaven for? He's talked about free buses. He's talked about free pre-K childcare. He's talked about a rent freeze. It's not clear.
It's not that long a list.
It's not that long a list. Excuse me?
It's not that long a list.
It's not clear where the money comes from. He faces a governor who supported him, but is certainly going into her own re-election year, not looking forward to raising taxes. He's got a, clearly hostile administration, but he's demonstrated a pragmatic streak. How do you figure where we go from here?
So he did what he had to do to win an election. and he actually promised lots of other things, and some really complicated ones. That he's going to have the city build. Everyone else had a plan to have developers build, and here are the conditions that would allow for it. He said the city's going to build 200,000 new units of affordable housing, and labor's going to build them. So, there's an old contractor cliche.
Organized labor, right.
Yeah, fast, cheap, good, you can get any two. And he's like, what the hell, we can get 4. Well, let's just do that. So that's one big thing he mentioned. He's talked about a Department of Community Safety separate from the NYPD. It's a big, ambitious, and promising thing. But as with free buses, the point is to have some tiny pilot. He was involved in one free bus thing per borough as an assembly person, which only lasted a year. There were all these sort of experiments with, hey, if you call 911 between 9 and 5 in Portland for some sorts of calls, you'll get a social service worker, right? But this department he's talking about is full-time, highly trained, serious, around-the-clock people who, if you want to recruit them and bring them in, you've got to pay them well, you've got to give them good city pensions, all those things, billions of dollars. And all this, I've been on campaigns and I've written nonsense on the back of napkins, and it's good enough to get you through. Like, hey, we'll just raise this one tax and it'll just be the same as New Jersey. So it wouldn't be the same as New Jersey. This doesn't really make sense. Also, not all the tax money would go to New York. All this is ridiculous. So with that said, the key thing is the city's felt unaffordable, out of control, and like everything's happening to us. Shout out to Amazon HQ too. If you know, right? And he caught that's
that was
not
the
the case.
Amazon headquarters plan for Long Island City that got killed because of local opposition and a bunch of other reasons.
And local opposition from lefties. And lefties who've been organizing, knocking on doors, actually trying to have a say in their own government, while the mainstream Democrats have sort of checked out of that.
Harry, where was the affordable housing in the development of Long Island City? And Long Island City just didn't pop up in a couple of weeks. Someone planned Long Island City.
But we've never connected affordable housing to the building of housing.
There you go.
And in fact, it's worse than that, because this is my life commitment story. Builders for years, at least 50 years, and possibly before that, have told the city that we have great building plans, but we can't afford your real estate taxes. So you have to give us a program to abate the taxes.
Right.
It's never made sense.
Right.
It's simply never made sense. The one issue that I worked on with Ed Koch was to deny Donald Trump a tax abatement for renovating the Commodore Hotel into a Hilton at 42nd and Lex. If you need a tax abatement to build at 42nd and Lex, then the city doesn't make any sense.
No,
but I'm just saying.
Yes, I agree with you.
These things should always be attached one to the other. I once, in some development project, I can't remember, where I was talking about, we're going to do this because the developers promised affordable housing and a playground and something else. And some reporter, one of you probably, said, Ruth, you're just selling zoning. And I said, it's better than giving it away.
Right.
And
I
the
think
city
that's the
voters, just further down the ballot, just made it harder for council members to extract these concessions, which is an interesting thing because everyone's so thirsty for more housing to get built. Just the last quick thing I want to say, like sort of big picture-wise, is Mamdani focused on non-triple prime voters, right? Which is like what they're called in the trade. And there are all these gatekeepers, like experts, pundits, professional politicians who sort of imagine this electorate of the people who do show up to vote consistently, and that's what you need. And he expanded that, and that was a really big and beautiful thing and very healthy for democracy. And he did it by having very simple messaging. And it's these 3 things, and you get to repeat free in different rhythms, right? And that's fine. It's an election, and he had, the benefit of Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams and some terrible foils as well. He did crack 50%. He broke 1 million votes. They're both the most of any mayor in my lifetime. But
largest turnout in the mayoral election since 1965.
Incredible. At the same time, Democrats rolled in New Jersey and Virginia with relatively boring, uninteresting candidates. This thing to redo the map in California.
I disagree with that
I'm being glib. I'm a parochial New Yorker. But what I'm saying is, Democrats of all stripes did well.
Governors in 2 states, whatever he said.
And more
now we know why Harry's here.
more people showed up all around, and a lot of this is very obviously as much credit as Mamdani gets and deserves. I did a whole sit-down with him about all the new people he brought in. I thought it was so admirable. Plainly, a ton of this is Trump, and that everyone is polarized. everything is down ballot, and people are desperate to come out in these elections and register, and it's terrible that it takes a threat like that to get us here, but there's something very appealing in people showing up and wanting to cast their votes.
Right, but Harry, I want to say, we, in the last, I don't know, 10 or 15, for a long time in my life, but again, dramatically in the last 10 years and since Trump won, many of the people who were angry came out to a street demonstration. What's different this time is that they came out and followed through. And I think you're right, it happened all over the country. A lot of it is a response to Trump. But I think Mamdani turned out with his top staff to really be good at organizing. I mean, they had 100,000 volunteers.
Yeah.
They knocked on 3 million doors in this city.
Including mine.
No, and they did it early. I mean, we were talking about, he's got 20,000 volunteers out there. And the number just grew and grew and grew. And nobody could find volunteers back in the time when Cuomo, they couldn't find volunteers for Cuomo.
And given
In
my
2000
age, I know a bunch of people who voted for Mamdani because their children told them to.
In 2011, in Zuccotti Park, a bunch of folks came together and did Occupy Wall Street. And everybody kept saying, what are they going to get out of that? They changed the whole conversation towards inequality and the whole point of, you know, the CEO used to make 10 times the amount of the line work, and now he's making 347. That was a huge thing. And then the labor movement had, when I went down to Washington after Obama got elected, labor had a 37% favorability rating. And you know what? Between inequality and what are the values of the unions came back. AOC becomes a rock star because she is a rock star. And this guy who has a once-in-a-generation political personality connected with all that, and that was waiting to happen. And the political establishment in New York City did not hear any of that. And this is where we are.
Yeah, you know, if you look at, in particular, I urge you to look at the city.nyc and look at their interactive maps where you can do all kinds of magic stuff that I don't understand how to do. You know, you look at, you know, among it, excuse me, younger people were brought out by Mamdani. You had a lot of older voters, many of whom were not very thrilled with Andrew Cuomo, but nevertheless, excuse me, were afraid of Mamdani. You did have, you know, even though in our neighborhoods a lot of the older people voted for Mamdani, that's not the case across the city. You had an age stratified result.
You know, so the New York Times had a really interesting article, which, you know, I was surprised to even read. There was, you know, a story about Chinese immigrant families, like naturalized citizens of an older generation versus their younger first generation, second generation, and what a huge difference there was. In their goals were the same, right? They want affordability, they want economic security, but the way they thought about it was completely different. So instead of the kids telling their parents how to vote and them, you know, coming together, it was a complete disagreement. And that's because of, you know, previous experience, you know, where they came from, the previous system, just some ideas about meritocracy and who would pay for what, the pragmatic element, while the, you know, younger generations were really buying into the joy, right, that the Mamdani campaign offered, right? It was buses, but also joy, happiness, you know, people who were excited to hear their language spoken by Mamdani, really engaging. So, you know, for those folks who were really kind of paying attention to that, older, younger, but there is absolutely a generational gap there amongst, you know, people have said, you know, Asian American voters, Hispanic voters, especially, there seems to be a gap there.
Well, you know, when you, I'm sorry.
I just want to go back to what Helen said about the happiness and the joy. I just want to say that's not incidental, because to go back to your first question, it's devilishly hard to figure out how to run the city and get anything done. I have some little experience with that. But it's been challenging for mayors, including those who've announced big plans that didn't always really materialize in the way that we expected they would. So there's lots of work to do, and it's going to be really hard. And it's going to be additionally hard because he's young and he hasn't managed anything. But
And he faces a governor who has her own demands.
we'll get to
and he
that.
has-
We'll
and
get back to
he faces
that.
Washington.
We'll get back to the. We'll get back to the. All I'm saying is, what I want to make a point is that, like, to take these steps, having a following, whatever age and whatever ethnicity and whatever immigrant status, having people who feel excited about this candidate,
Invested.
and invested and will be responsive to being told. Some will be disappointing news. We tried that and it didn't work, but we're doing this, but we succeeded in that. I think one of the things we're going to find from him, my expectation, is that he's going to be, compared to many people in politics, a relatively clear communicator about both the wins and the challenges.
A terrific communicator. I mean, he's already explaining he's not just telling people who his appointments are. He's explaining to people on social media what they do because he knows that there are a lot of people out there who don't understand any of this.
But he also knows, and this is part of his pragmatic streak, which is very encouraging to me, that because if you know anything about movement politics, and I went through it in Brooklyn College in the 1960s, if you'll pardon my aging myself, where the leftist factions would rather turn on each other and fight than fight their common enemy. That the DSA, the socialist purist types, are going to be trying to pull him back. They're not,
They've given him a lot of room to move.
I'm not sure.
Well,
it doesn't matter. He's got he has a 4-year term. He might have more, but yes, you're right. He's going to have to figure out strategies with the governor. I just want to say I have no idea how that's going to go, but I want to say if you are the governor of this state right now, you're looking at what we all just talked about.
Right, exactly.
You're looking about the fact that this is a candidate. There are candidates who can bring out people, who can radically increase turnout, and so how do you square with that?
Well, see, I would argue, and this ties into the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
She was at his closing rally.
Exactly.
And there's this giant chant of tax the rich, and she's stuck, and it's real loud, and he has to come out and embrace her and sort of help her off. And like politicians, they're people, they're thin-skinned, they're sensitive, they notice things. Like that's a powerful moment and a demonstration of the sort of movement building Ruth was just talking about.
That moment's gone in 2 or 3
Well,
nothing is. That's a moment we're talking about right now. A year from now, there's 8 million other things that have gone on. Here's the thing, though. If you thought for a minute that Andrew Cuomo was going to work productively with Governor Hochul for the betterment of New York City, you're more delusional than Curtis Sliwa, right?
It's, and this is also a generational issue. I believe that the Democrats had a fabulous night. They had a great night in Virginia, in New Jersey,
Pennsylvania,
in California. Arguably, I don't know if it's even arguably, that Donald Trump was the motivating factor in those elections. That people wanted to, among other things, wanted to send a message to Donald Trump to, get lost. We're not buying what you're selling. It was different in New York City. Mm-hmm. In New York City, I think arguably there was a more positive motivation than just, I don't want Andrew Cuomo, I don't want Donald Trump. This may be.
No, I think that's
worry
true.
when I think I'm, giving into optimism. I've been slapped down too many times in my life. Am I making any sense with that?
Yeah, but I think I would actually put it. I would move it a little bit. I think you're right that there was an independent and large movement for Mamdani, stimulated by a lot of good organizing, a lot of good communicating, but it's not so much just anti-Trump. It's that at least some people in this city understand that before the election, New York City was about to be in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. Now he's made it clear it's going to be worse and ugly. I spend most of my time now working with the newest New Yorkers, with our immigrant communities. It's terrifying to see what's happening. Anybody who thinks ICE is not arresting in this city, they're arresting every day at the courthouses. They're arresting people who show up for their court hearings.
With their legally required hearings.
Exactly. And next step is going to be on the streets. Yesterday in Chicago, ICE people chased a preschool teacher down the street. So some of that's happening. So I think some of the response in New York was we need somebody who is going to figure out how we stand against this threat to our city. And it's certainly not going to be Andrew Cuomo, who was, making private phone calls with the president, apparently.
Well, back to your original point about the number of registered voters who don't vote, I think, this election really showed that a turn away from this focus just on the national level, that we can look at the local and state level again as an alternative
Right.
to what's going on nationally. And that really hasn't happened for a long time. It's really been about the national level. That's why I thought the ballot measure was also very interesting, that result there.
Right.
But there is something about, we call Zohran by his first name. There was something, I think, in particular about the way that he communicated, the energy of the election that, caught the national attention, less so than New Jersey.
I like what you're saying, Helen, but I also think then that was a factor. Yes, you're right, there's anti-Trump in Virginia and New Jersey, but there was also the notion of what we need to do now is elect a strong governor, because someone needs to help us with what's happening in the country. So I think it's connected.
The eternal trap in New York City politics, and not only just in New York City, is identity politics. And in particular, it played out most loudly within the Jewish community, between the Jewish community and other people. I think it's very powerful that we elected a Muslim. I remember in 1961, I was living in the projects in East New York and Brooklyn. I went with my folks to vote. In those days, you could go in, and Robert Wagner was running for a third term, and Louis Lefkowitz was the liberal Republican and Jewish attorney general, was running for mayor. And I went into the polling booth with my father, and he said, "Shh, don't tell your mother." And he voted for Lefkowitz. And then I waited with my mother, and she came in and said, "Shh, don't tell your father." And she voted for Lefkowitz because we had never had a Jewish mayor. And so, I think that you're kind of heartless if you don't understand the level of pride that Muslims feel at the idea of electing the first Muslim.
So I just was going to say, yes, there's a focus on identity politics. Yes, some of it needs to be looked at. But even before Wagner and Lefkowitz, in the history of New York City Democratic Party, I think Harry will back me up, there were three, the Democrats always won in New York City, and there were three citywide positions, mayor, controller, and something called president of the city council. The Democratic Party for years picked its candidates to be sure that there was an Irishman, an Italian, and a Jew. There are minutes of the Democratic Party meetings in New York saying, we have Beam and we have Procaccino, we need an Irishman, let's get O'Dwyer. That's how they picked the ticket.
If you want to, I guess this should be relevant because history should be relevant for students, even though they think history started yesterday, that the New York City government, it was like the Irish had the police department, the Italians had the sanitation department, and the Jews had the Board of Education. There were no blacks in that equation. There were no Latinos in that equation. But that kind of ethnic stratification is
part of our history.
It's not alien to this city in any way.
Yeah, but that's tied into the generational thing. You had young people of all persuasions on this.
That's because the economics and the affordability, it almost has the potential to minimize identity politics. I don't mean to, identity politics will never go away, but I think there was something beyond the traditional tribal warfare we see in this, even with, I think, legitimate questions that many people in the Jewish community have about Mamdani.
Well, he would have won a huge majority and a clear mandate if he hadn't lost Jewish voters, who are a very large voting bloc and a very
But even
diverse
there was
one.
a fairly close
Something
vote.
From the exit polling I've seen, he lost it pretty overwhelmingly. So this wasn't just like Jewish Voices for Peace or some totally minoritarian appeal, but like mainstream Reform rabbis were giving sermons right before this. He got about 30% altogether of the Jewish vote. And again, it's complicated because there's Orthodox Jews, there's Upper West Side Jews, Orthodox Upper West Side Jews, many, many different sorts of Jews in New York. But it's a really interesting moment and shift. I'd point out that the reason Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are holidays is that all the teachers were Jewish women. And so you couldn't have classes then, it'd be ridiculous. And then Ramadan finally became one in 2015. We've added Diwali much more recently, and there's something nice about that. And then there's something very confusing about how you should or do divide those spoils. I would argue that you should eliminate, alternate side parking for every reasonably major religion.
Actually, just so you know, when I was a reporter, I covered the suspension of alternate side of the street parking for the two Eids and for the two Muslim Eids.
Yeah.
And I realized that Hindus have hundreds of gods. I think we should, because I drove and parked on the street, we should have suspension of alternate side of the street parking for each one of those gods. But I was not successful in that.
Different by neighborhood in a lot of ways. 60 different days. There's a whole bunch of ways to think about this. But a nice thing would be to just be like no major tests and on those days, and every kid has 5 days for whatever they need to observe. And because those days there's no major tests, it's not a big deal if they're out. And just adding fewer and fewer school days to the point where this bothers all sorts of parents, and Jewish ones, and Catholic ones, and Muslim ones, and atheist ones. Like, wait, why are we off from school again? What is this? And the school day is so short. That's why we now have virtual days instead of short days. It couldn't get any shorter in New York. It would be against the law. So you hit some of the limits of how far you can go there.
But in this election, the degree...
What was the question?
I'm trying to grab it back.
I want to come back on the identity.
But in this election, the degree to which the affordability, with all the Sturm und Drang over the identity politics, I think it was that the generational and affordability focus were far more dominant than we have seen in other recent elections. Unless I'm being naive.
I'm arguing that the identity politics is a generational construct. That yes, there will be in this town pockets of power and who's got what power and who's got. But I don't think that's being defined by identity politics anymore. In the next generation.
So I don't want the whole program to be about this, but it was clearly a huge identity politics issue in the Jewish community.
Yes.
The Jewish community, as Harry started to suggest, is 17 different communities by borough, by denomination, by attitudes towards the Middle East. So it's not surprising that somebody who has fierce views on some of those issues was a lightning rod for some people. That's going to divide you. You could say what his views are on that doesn't really have to do with how he's going to pick up your garbage. You could say that, but there's also still people who are like, I don't want to vote for a mayor who's radically different from me on some issue that matters to me. There were people who said that. What I want to say is that in the worst style of what electoral politics and campaigns are all about, that became Andrew Cuomo's issue. The more campaign debates or whatever were less in the primary, more after I think people convinced him to run on this line. Andrew Cuomo had a list of things to say in press conferences to the press and in debates that were divisive. Exactly, that's the word. It was hitting him as a Muslim.
Yeah.
It has Islamophobia issues. It was hitting him on socialism. I do want to say about socialism, every single person that I know who's arguing about socialism is very happy to have Social Security.
Well, so yes, I went to Brooklyn College. It was free when I went there, which he also wants to do. He wants to bring back free colleges.
So I think all of these things are worth talking about with huge respect for people in the Jewish community who really felt they couldn't vote for him because of this or that. It is terrible for the New York Jewish community. I think I get to say that. The extent to which this issue was weaponized by Andrew Cuomo.
So, having said that, does this change the weight of identity politics in New York City politics going forward? The generational focus on affordability, on economic issues, as opposed to identity issues, does it change the weight of identity politics?
Of course, and that's cool. Every election does. This is a new coalition. You have a really profound new Muslim political identity, and this is geographically distributed world religion that emerged here after 9/11, when I believe Mamdani was 9, and Andrew Cuomo is suggesting he loved it, which is grotesque. To what Ruth was saying, and so that's an interesting thing. It also means, by the way, our polling numbers with Asians, which is always, speaking of something so broad as to be totally meaningless, are even more confusing and incoherent, and South Asians and East Asians have very different politics, and all this stuff. But having a candidate who lost black voters significantly in the primary, and Jewish voters in both rounds, getting elected mayor and building that coalition shows some of the new forces that are emerging. And by the way, new people coming to the table, as you were saying with your parents, there's something so exciting and actually wonderful about that. And somebody I can see and identify with is, going to be the mayor of this city. That's a cool thing to show your kids.
But that's Ruth's point. Ruth's point, I think, is that identity can be a strength and identity can be a club. And how you do that affects the civic tenor of the city.
I want to say something more. Maybe this is where you're going, and we can keep trying to analyze this election and look at the maps and whatever. But I want to go back to your first question. Zohran Mamdani is now the mayor of New York City. He has an agenda. It's going to be hard to move that agenda because it's hard for any mayor to move any agenda, and his is clearly up against people with power at some moments. But beyond that, all of the groups we're talking about, South Asians, East Asians, Orthodox Jews, whatever, Queens people, everybody now in some way or other needs to want to work with the mayor.
Right.
There are things that their communities need. There are things, so it may not be everyone, and there will be still moments of huge opposition. There will be lots of people saying I told you so about anything. But again, I think piece of the message of this program and a bunch of programs I'm doing in the next 2 weeks is those of us who have any influence on people need to remind people that we have a city that has a lot of needs, and the more that we can come together and work with the people in city government, the better off we'll be.
I want to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think the last thing is just to kind of bring it back to this generational divide is I think the younger generation is more racial, ethnically, religiously diverse, period.
Right.
So I think that, kind of is a hallmark of what is to come. That maybe the identity politics is shifting because of the fragmentation we are going to continue to see across those traditional identity politics lines. Currently, I think absolutely employment, housing are of huge concern. For folks who are in their 20s.
I want to take a question, but it's not only the Asian community and the Jewish community that have these internal divisions. I covered the census when I was at New York Newsday, and in 1990, all of a sudden, Puerto Ricans are less than 50% of the Hispanic population. So what changes? Immigration becomes an issue. Immigration is not an issue for Puerto Rico. There's a degree to which demographics drives the issue agenda. When I grew up, blacks were essentially American-born blacks, and then you had the big Caribbean, and now we have a huge African influx. Those are different communities with different needs. I mean, we identify them as black, and that's really, that's in many ways those are two broad categories. So, yes, sir. Give us your name and your question, please.
Hello, my name is James Viafara. I attend Medgar Evers College. I'm a part of the Edward T. Rogowski program, and my question today relates to housing, the development of housing and the price of affordability. So considering questionable determinations that are found within affordability metrics using area median income to define affordable housing, what could this mayoral administration do to advance the creation of city-based affordability metrics, such as a borough median income determination?
Or even a neighborhood, maybe. The question is centered on the fact that the standard area median income includes Westchester, and it includes some very wealthy suburbs. So the percentage of affordability determines whether people who live in that neighborhood qualify for those housing units. I don't know how specific he's been, but he has talked about, how you fund affordable housing. Clearly he wants to go beyond the current city policy of mandatory inclusionary housing, the fact that you want to have, if you want to build, you must include housing. I mean, you guys cover this.
So I don't think he's locked himself in. Just having mandatory.
I don't think he's locked himself in on a lot of stuff, by the way.
I think so too. I think for someone who can be, when he wants to, a very clear communicator, he's perfectly good at word salading his way around getting locked into a position, and that's a political tool. Obviously, the area median income stuff is choppy and botched, and it creates to all the tribal stuff we're talking about, like weird winners and losers, and then want to protect current systems, but there's tremendous space for reform and intelligent different approaches there. There's programs like the HFDC one that's meant to let people make sure they have an affordable place to really live and stay in New York. And it just goes to college kids, not mostly from CUNY, whose parents can pay for a place in full, and then they've got a low maintenance locked in for life. And so looking at all these programs, and property taxes, by the way, and like where there's space for reform, where you have the political leverage and will to get through those, is something I'm very optimistic about, with a smart young mayor who's read and thought about these things, and I think has recognized some of the problems and hasn't overcommitted himself in the election.
I don't think, again, I think his strength on a communication level is so good that I think he can explain what he's doing and what he's trying to do in real time, so that people can understand what the issue is and how big a problem this is. I really think that people voted for him thinking that he's going to be on their side, because this political establishment did not respond to them. So what is substance and what is style, and how he goes through this administration and how he talks to people about what is happening, I think he's going to be better at this than we've had in a very, very long time. And Andrew Cuomo would never have pulled that off.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ricardo, and I'm a student at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I want to talk about Mamdani's experience or lack of, and how maybe that can be a good thing, because he's not too tied to the way politics are done, sort of in a Trump type of way. And how important is his administration in really running the government? You know what I mean?
Right.
How important are they? Is he good at picking people that can run the government the way
Well,
he
he's,
needs
you
it
know,
run?
I mean, I think the early signs are actually encouraging, in the sense of who he's named to head his transition committee, who are veterans of government. You know, these are left of center people who know the levers of power. I mean, you know, Ruth, you've been on the inside of this. You know,
Well,
this is a man who's run an assembly office of 5 people, who's going to take over a government of 300,000 people.
Okay, and with huge respect, because he was a great friend of mine, David Dinkins had zero management experience when he became mayor. He had been a mayor and the city clerk. I mean, I'm sorry.
And borough president.
A state legislator, borough president, and the city clerk. Oversaw an office, small offices, and then moved into this job. This job has been described as the second most challenging
the
job in the
toughest.
United States. But just for dimensions for your listeners, and I loved your question, nobody has experience
Right.
managing a $100+ billion budget in a city of almost 9 million people. It's just that it doesn't exist. 300,000 employees is the number used. I have a huge issue with that. The city actually has many, 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 many more employees, because we give contracts to everything from social service organizations to people who build desks. And all the people who work for those companies are essentially paid out of my tax dollars. So I'm just saying, I like your question, because you gave an upbeat spin on it. It's a chance to come in and learn, and it matters tremendously whom he appoints. I think the biggest thing, and I think that Mamdani is up to this, but the biggest thing is understanding that one person cannot possibly do that job.
And you singled out Dinkins. Abe Beam didn't have great management experience. I'm talking about managing. De Blasio.
De Blasio, none. I just was
Bloomberg's the only one
Exactly.
who ran something. Nobody else has run something. John Lindsay didn't have management experience.
Yusuf called it the second toughest job.
Yes.
When he was begging to get a second term after a terrible first one. He was the last person before Mamdani to get 1 million votes. So Trump and Cuomo was only I can fix it. Trump and Mamdani was gesturing at these people and saying, how much worse could I be? And that was the right appeal here.
But I think it's going to be tremendous, and Bob spoke to this. It's who he appoints, and it's got to be a combination, hopefully sometimes in the same person, but there are a lot of appointments you get to make. People who really know their areas well, people whose instinct is progressive in the way that his is, and people who have some experience in or with city government.
And you know, he reminds me of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's, appetite for engagement. It's going to be very hard for all these groups he wants them in. He wants to talk to them. He's got Obama's, there's a touch of Obama, and there's a touch of Tony Robbins. I mean, he is a motivational guy who is very well liked, and De Blasio could never pull that off. I'm not casting aspersions.
I don't want to. I want to take another, but I want to take another. I'm sorry.
There's something about this why not that Zohran Mamdani has said. Why can't we have creative solutions? I mean, other folks have mentioned, like President Trump said, let's build a wall, and people thought that was nuts, and manifested some walls, right? So I think this idea that you can't think big and be creative, but also care about the experience, the right appointments. I mean, so I think that's like the big promise of, this election.
As long as we're not building walls.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your question, please.
Thank you. My name is Dan Flamheft. I'm a graduate student at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. My question is, speaking of history, is there a precedent in New York City for a socialist mayor? And how did it play out policy-wise?
Yes. I mean, who wants to bring up LaGuardia, Mark Antonio? I mean,
How did it work out as far as initiatives and policy?
I would say that LaGuardia was one of the greatest mayors that this city had, and it was because whatever labels he used, his instinct was strongly toward whatever benefits we're going to provide, we need to provide for the poorest people in the city. We need to make this a city for everybody. That's one definition of socialism. Worked for him. Bob mentioned Vito Marcantonio, who was around the side, who worked with LaGuardia and then went on to run for Congress.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is there is a history. Labels have become wildly difficult for a long time.
Yeah.
In the history of New York City, going back before LaGuardia, just in case you'd like to know.
You have to talk to him.
I'm sorry, I have to talk to him. Okay, I'm talking to him. He asked my
Right, no, you
question.
got to talk to him.
Okay. In the history of New York City, this big issue of ranked choice voting, which I support, but we had ranked choice voting in the early days of the 20th century, was called proportional representation. It worked to let smaller groups get a say in government. And in one election around 1920, not sure of the year, maybe Harry knows, 2 socialists and a communist were elected to the New York City Council, and then they did away with proportional representation.
Benjamin Davis was the communist from Harlem. He ended up in prison. He wrote a memoir, Benjamin Davis, which is fascinating.
Right, but Cy Gerson, Pete Caccione, they were all part of that era.
Proportional representation.
I was not covering this race.
And in a lot of ways, much better than ranked choice voting, and certainly better than our utterly ridiculous system of ranked choice primaries and specials, followed by winner takes, most votes wins generals, as we've just seen. But that was a wonderful system of government, and actually gave one that really represented the city and lawmakers with totally different politics who had to
Get along with work with each other,
yeah.
right? No,
Going back to generational for a second, this idea that socialism is something that has to be dealt with. I don't think the young folks experience socialism or think of socialism the way
the word is not the
but Social Security is the socialist program.
well.
give them a few years. Give them a few
Farm
years.
support
LaGuardia, the socialist man.
Agricultural supports
The federal
are
government,
socialism.
all the money. So David Dinkins, who is a DSA member, a paper DSA member, and whatever, right? But he was constantly like, we give so much more to Washington than we get back, and Washington's like, eh. And it was very tough. And Mamdani's going to have that. We're going to have less federal money and much tougher decisions and austerity that way, right when he's promising abundance. And
we have 8 minutes left, and as happened in the campaign, we've had virtually no discussion of education. And which is very frustrating in the degree to which, Mamdani has this idea of not supporting mayoral control, which is extremely unexplained. And do we have any idea what he's looking at for his education plan? I really do not know, and I follow this stuff fairly closely.
very little who he picks for chancellor is going to be really significant and probably the biggest pitfall trap ahead of him. To something Ruth said earlier, Mike Bloomberg, who got who got mayoral control of the schools, was Rudy Giuliani raged for it. Everyone was sick of him by the end. It wouldn't give it to him. Mike came in, they just handed it over. But he got asked at one point after he'd won re-election, he's like, well, you're supposed to be politically accountable. What are we supposed to do now? And he hissed at the guy, you can boo me at parades. And so the question of, Whether Mamdani has some vision he wants to implement, I doubt it. He seems like he wants to keep the unions happy, and he's done a lot to suggest that without trying to get too much farther into things. But in the absence of that, if he appoints someone who has like a big ideological vision, and this involves some of the tests potentially, the SATs or the SATs, and how those play out, this could really be a flash or tension point, and he's got to think about that. If he wants to spend political capital there, if he just wants to try to competently administer the system, I don't think he's thought up to this point, and I'm sure he's starting to now,
I just think
about what success would be for him.
It's kind of it's a strange thing not to have more fleshed out in the campaign.
I mean, I agree with you that that it's too bad it's not fleshed out. But I can't think. I've now been through a bunch of mayors. I've been around for a long time. I can't think of a mayor either in the mayoral election or immediately taking office who had some vision for education. The quick idea was find the right chancellor. Sometimes we found good chancellors, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we had good chancellors, by the way, who had huge educational vision, Tony Alvarado, but couldn't, in fact, figure out how to manage the Board of Education, which is its own challenge. So I think it's a huge issue. I don't think it's been well addressed. I think what Harry said is critical. It's who you pick as chancellor, and I'm going to add, it's giving that person some time, because labor has a huge stake in education, families have a huge stake in education, and so I really want to take, I don't want to take the burden off of him because he needs to do that, but I want to say picking up instead on expanding childcare is a way of saying I'm ready to make a long-term investment in the children of this city and the families of this city. But the chancellor appointment is going to matter, and I'm going to argue, despite everything we know about the federal government right now, that the education system in New York City actually needs more money and needs additional teachers. And shout out to Councilmember Gail Brewer, who's been saying for 10 years we could solve a lot of problems if we had a social worker in every school, and we don't.
Very quickly, we don't have much time left, please.
So where could young people go to essentially draw and lay out our legislative objectives before the mayoralty during this transitional stage?
Well, when you talk about the transitional stage between now and, arguably Mamdani is a lot closer to the age of those young people. But I mean, how does the excitement of young adults translate into people younger than them?
Well, wait a minute. You're all Rogowski fellows. The answer is with you. Just go organize on your campuses, put together groups, come up with an agenda, basically wise advice. Agenda should only have 3 points. I know it could have 43 points, but you'll do better if you have 3 points. And so to say the Rogowski interns want, or the students at Hostos are most interested in, and start moving that now. You won't get much attention during the transition. They've got 57 days. I think now it's probably 55 days between now and when they take office. But if you put those issues on the table, they'll get picked up after January. I'm the co-chair of the Interfaith Center of New York. We have a 6-point program. We sent it to all the candidates a month ago, with all due respect. Only Curtis Lee were bothered to call us back. But the agenda is there, and we'll keep working on it. And that's how you move your ideas.
Let me try to get one last question. Tell us your name and campus.
Hi everyone, my name is Laiba Tabassum and I'm from Queen's College. So my question is that now that Mamdani is our first Muslim mayor, how do we think his leadership might impact education policies, and what new approaches or ideas we can expect from his leadership?
Again, we just discussed that there's a lack of clarity about his education policy. He has talked about restoring free universities, about making CUNY tuition free, as well as when I went there. And I grew up in the projects. I couldn't have gone to an out-of-town school. Does anybody want to?
I want to say more. I mean, you connected a few issues. It's very important that he's our first Muslim mayor, because I think identity politics matters. There are 1 million Muslims in New York. Those 1 million Muslims, guess what? Like the 1.3 million Jews, they have lots and lots of different opinions and different groups and different mosques where they worship, and it's not like some block. But he has made it really clear that because he is proud of his background as an immigrant, as a South Asian, as a Muslim, he is going to try to make this a city in which everyone can be proud of their background, in which the schools work for everybody. So he's going to use his commitment against hate speech and for inclusion in everything that he does.
You know, we've all looked, you know, we've been through many mayoral administrations. You know, for me, I grew up under, I thought Wagner's first name was Mayor. And we still blame John Lindsay. It's still Lindsay's fault. I mean,
Right.
we still blame.
I told the Mamdani people, just be ready for the first snowstorm.
That's a generational joke. When we look at, I mean, he is tapping into a sense of optimism, and I believe optimism is a very powerful tool. And again, am I being Pollyanna-ish? I mean, we just have about 50 seconds left.
He's created a sense of optimism and hope, which is really important.
I hope so too, but hey, shout out to Andrew Yang, Mayor Andrew Yang.
Well, you're a reporter.
Put up
You
the Democratic
think,
Party
you know,
since.
you've
Diane
gotta be
Morales, who
crabby.
had great posters, and people were very excited, and then decided to memory hole her. So it's awesome that Mamdani's gotten this far. He's smart, ambitious. I'm hopeful he can get it together, but there's a lot more to do. Messaging is critical, but it's not the whole thing, and we're about to find out with the rest.
Messaging is critical, but and there is a follow through. He comes with unique challenges politically, both in Albany and especially in Washington. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about Donald Trump, but I think that we will. We've run out of time. I always make that line. Thank you for this discussion. We'll see you next time on CUNY Forum.